Welcome, dear listeners, to Mr. Horror. Tonight's tale is not for the faint of heart as we delve into the chilling story of a woman and her ex. Prepare yourselves for a story of obsession, fear, and the darkest depths of the human psyche. As the night draws in and the shadows grow long, remember that what you are about to hear is not just a tale, it is a warning. A warning of the dangers that lurk behind closed doors, of the monsters that can hide in plain sight. So turn off the lights, draw the curtains, and settle in for a night of terror. But beware, once you enter the world of Mr. Horror, there is no going back. Stalked by my ex, a terrifying tale of obsession and revenge. Julia had thought she was over him. It had been almost a year since she had broken up with Max, and she had moved on with her life. But then she started getting the calls. At first, she didn't recognize the number, but then she answered, and there was Max's voice on the other end, soft and familiar. He was just checking in, he said.
How are you?
She was polite but distant, and tried to end the call as soon as possible. But then the calls kept coming. Every day, at all hours of the day and night, Max would call her. Sometimes he would leave messages, other times he would just breathe heavily into the phone. Julia tried blocking his number, but then he started calling from different numbers, making it impossible to avoid him. And then came the gifts. At first, they seemed harmless enough. A bouquet of flowers, a box of chocolates, but then they started getting stranger and more unsettling. A teddy bear with its eyes gouged out, a necklace made out of human hair. Each gift came with a note, written in Max's slanted handwriting, telling Julia how much he missed her and how he would do anything to be with her again. Julia tried to ignore it all, to go about her life as if nothing was happening, but the constant calls and gifts were starting to wear her down, and she found herself checking over her shoulder every time she left the house, wondering if Max was watching her. One night, she woke up to the sound of scratching at her bedroom window. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and saw Max's face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and manic. Julia screamed and scrambled for her phone, dialing 911 as quickly as she could. The police arrived quickly, but Max was already gone. They took a report and promised to keep an eye out for him, but Julia knew it was only a matter of time before he came back. She started sleeping with a knife under her pillow and kept all the doors and windows locked at all times. She stopped answering calls from unknown numbers, but Max still found ways to get to her, leaving notes on her car, slipping into her workplace when she wasn't looking. Julia knew she needed to do something before it was too late. But what could she do? Max was like a shadow, always lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. She was trapped, caught in a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but Max didn't stop. He continued his relentless pursuit of Julia, haunting her every waking moment. She couldn't focus on anything else, couldn't relax for even a moment. Max had taken over her life completely. Julia started seeing a therapist, hoping to find some way to cope with the constant stress and fear. A therapist suggested getting a restraining order, but Julia knew that it wouldn't do any good. Max had already proven that he was willing to break the law to get to her. One night, Julia was working late at the office, trying to catch up on some work that she had fallen behind on. She was the only one there, the building silent and still. But then she heard a noise, a faint rustling sound, coming from somewhere nearby. Her heart pounding, Julia crept down the hallway, trying to stay quiet. And then she saw him, Max, standing at the end of the hall, watching her with an expression of mad glee on his face. Julia froze, unable to move. She was trapped, with no way out. Max started walking towards her, slow and deliberate. Julia took a step back, then another, until she was pressed up against the wall. Max kept coming, his eyes fixed on her, and then he lunged. Julia screamed and tried to run, but Max was too quick. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her towards him. Julia struggled, but it was no use. Max was too strong. He whispered in her ear, his breath hot and sour. "I love you, Julia. I'll never let you go." And then he kissed her, his lips hard and demanding. Julia felt sick to her stomach, like she was going to vomit. She tried to pull away, but Max was holding her too tightly. And then, suddenly, he let go. He stepped back, his face contorted in rage. "You're making me do this, Julia," he said. "You're making me crazy." And then he turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Julia was left alone, shaking and terrified. She knew that things had just gotten a whole lot worse. Max wasn't going to stop, and now he was more dangerous than ever. She had to find a way to stop him before it was too late. Julia was at her breaking point. She couldn't take it anymore. The constant fear, the unrelenting terror, it was all too much. She knew that if she didn't do something soon, Max was going to kill her. Desperate, Julia decided to take matters into her own hands. She reached out to an old friend, a private investigator who had helped her out in the past. She explained the situation to him, and he promised to do everything in his power to help her. Over the next few days, the private investigator gathered as much information as he could about Max. He tracked down his address, his workplace, his friends and family, and then he made a plan. Late one night, the private investigator showed up at Julia's doorstep. He was holding a file folder, thick with papers and photographs. "I've got something," he said. "Something that might help you." They sat down at the kitchen table, and the private investigator started to lay out his plan. He had discovered that Max was heavily involved in an online forum for incels, men who believed that they were involuntarily celibate and blamed women for their problems. Max had been posting about Julia on the forum, bragging about how he was going to make her his again. The private investigator had created a fake profile on the forum, posing as a woman who was interested in Max. He had been chatting with Max for days, gaining his trust, and now he had convinced Max to meet him in person. Julia was skeptical. What if he's just playing along? What if he knows it's a trap? The private investigator shook his head. He's too arrogant for that. He thinks he's invincible. He won't be able to resist the chance to finally have a woman who's interested in him. Julia took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do it." The private investigator gave her a burner phone with instructions to call the police if anything went wrong. And then he left, disappearing into the night. The next day, Julia waited nervously. She had agreed to meet Max at a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. She had no idea what to expect. But then he arrived, swaggering into the room with a grin on his face. He looked different than she remembered, thinner, more gaunt. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hair was lank and greasy. He didn't even notice the private investigator until it was too late. The investigator tackled him to the ground, holding him down while Julia called the police. When they arrived, Max was ranting and raving, spitting venom at everyone in the room, but it was no use. He was arrested, charged with stalking and harassment, and taken away in handcuffs. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe it was finally over. She had her life back. But even as she sat there, she knew that it wasn't really over. Max was still out there, somewhere, waiting for his chance to come back. She would never be completely free from him. But for now, she was safe. And that was enough. We hope you've enjoyed this night of terror here at Mr. Horror. If you're looking for more ways to get your heart racing and your palms sweaty, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a spine-chilling story. And if you dare, leave us a comment below with your own tales of horror. We're always on the lookout for new stories to send shivers down our spines. Thank you for joining us, dear listeners. Until next time, remember to keep your eyes peeled and your senses sharp, for you never know what horrors may be lurking just beyond your line of sight.